webcast, is risk and compliance monitoring the right track for you? So whether you're in the world of Sarbanes-Oxley or Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, or you're dealing with segregation of duties or continuous controls monitoring issues, governance, risk and compliance, or enterprise risk management, we're going to be discussing topics around compliance monitoring today. So thank you. We have attendees from Asia, Europe, and North America today. So good evening, good afternoon, good morning to all of you. So we're going to be with you for 45 minutes addressing these topics. First of all, just introduce myself and my co-panelist. I'm Dan French. I'm founder and CEO at Consider Solutions. I'm very pleased to have as co-panelist Hans van Ness, who's the Chief Operating Officer with a vast array of experience in these areas. So to give you a little bit of context, many of you know us. If you don't know us, you probably want to understand what's the perspective we're coming at these topics from. And we focus on this issue or this aspiration we call world-class finance, which is about helping the business drive better business results, reducing the cost of finance, optimizing cash flow, and having better risk management. And as you look through a lens at what that really means, it's these pillars of financial control and compliance, which a lot of folks on this webcast are focused on, broader risk assurance, such as fraud, anti-corruption, waste, error, and the optimization of financial processes, all built on a platform of IT and ERP enablement. So that's the way we tend to look at these things. These are some of the organizations we work with around the world. You'll recognize many of those logos, so no need to go into that in any more detail. These are the topics we'd like to cover with you today. I'm just running through the introduction here. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's new in the environment around governance, risk and compliance, and what role the tools play. Have a discussion around compliance and the shift from compliance thinking to enterprise risk thinking. A discussion about how we establish whether we're on the right track or not. What do we need to do to optimize our activities? I'm going to be handing over to Hans to talk about experiences and customer case studies in GRC initiatives, talking about GRC, IRC, and you'll hear more about that. Then we'll have a status update and outlook about best practices across the industry. What are the best doing and what are the rest doing? And we'll come back with some considerations for a deeper dive and some conclusions, and we will have a Q&A session at the end. So please do ask questions as you go through. There is a panel on your user interface to ask questions, so please do as we go through, and we will endeavor to answer them at the end. If we don't get time to answer all of them, we will answer them by email, so whatever question you ask will get answered. If you have any technical problems with the GoToWebinar service, again, put a question in there and one of our team will help you out. So looking forward to an exciting 45 minutes and learning a lot of new things, so welcome. So in terms of context, these are some of the themes I want to explore. There is an inherent paradox between risk thinking and control thinking. I'm going to talk about that. It's become very clear, and organizations we work with have started to really address that and understand how to deal with that paradox. Looking at managing risk and control, this issue of fact versus judgment or fact versus opinion, how do we get as fact-based as possible? And in GRC tools, are they burden or value? Or perhaps a bit of both. So let's start with this, the classic example. If you've attended any presentation or webcast I've been involved in, this photograph always gets the opportunity to air itself. This is a perfect image to me about risk and control. This is a photograph of an entry to a parking lot, and if you look carefully in the middle, down the entrance way, you'll see an electronic parking barrier. And as you drive into the parking lot, you swipe your ID card into the reader, and if it recognizes you, it opens the barrier and you drive through. Same thing happens in the evening, let you out, so the company can manage the risk of inappropriate access to the building and the car park. And obviously, as you might expect, every 3 months, the company that provides the barrier, they come in and they do a test, and they can prove that that barrier works effectively 100% of the time. Now, as you look at the snow falling in November, you start to see that that doesn't tell you the whole picture. And to me, this is a critical illustration and consideration when we're thinking about controls. We build controls, internal controls, whether they're manual, hybrid, automated, embedded in our ERPs. These are the parking barriers. But we've always got to remember that control assurance is not enough. We've also got to understand residual risk, because otherwise we'll never get the full picture. What we want to do in business is make sure that our controls, our parking barriers work well, but also we understand where the tire tracks are. So that's the paradox. At one point, people were quite keen to believe that controls would give you 100% coverage, and clearly they don't. So the second issue is about fact versus opinion, or fact versus judgment. We all know what should happen in our business processes, but what we need to know is what actually does happen, whether it's in head office, in shared service centers, in regional offices around the world. The difference between what actually happens and what does happen is a critical delta. And whether that's because processes are ignored, or people get around them, or whether we can't properly enforce our policies and controls, or maybe because different operating units found better ways to do the job, they all have a performance impact. And we've got to understand the difference between what we think is happening and what actually happens. So that's a critical element there as well. And then thirdly, GRC tools. I know there's folks on the webcast who have had many years of experience, some are new, and some are considering applying GRC tools. And there's a spectrum of experience out there in the world of organizations who found the tools to be a burden. And typically, we tend to see that those folks that find the tools a burden are usually those that have implemented a tool and haven't properly considered the process that they're trying to automate. There's value when there's a process that's understood, defined, agreed with an outcome. And we want to consider how we focus emphasis on value rather than burden. But there is a genuine risk that tools can become a burden. So the new GRC reality, we've had a lot of change in the business world since the GRC term was coined. There's a change in context, changing business landscape, changing priorities. Technology is having a big shift right now, and this change in philosophy or paradigm, I'm going to touch on each of these before we get into some detail. So first of all, from a business point of view, whether it's finance or general business operations, there has been a noticeable shift. I mean, during the last decade, obviously, there's a massive focus on investing in financial controls, because there have clearly been some weaknesses there. But also, over the past 10, 15 years, we've dramatically cut down the cost of operations through automation, shared services, and the like. Now, we're looking at, we've optimized financial controls. We're using automation, such as governance, risk, and compliance tools. We are making sure we optimize financial controls, only have those controls that are most effective. We continue to drive down the cost of operations, and now the focus is very much on performance. So performance and risk now become the vital balance. So business value, business risk, this is where we're focused now. And this is affecting our thinking and organization thinking about GRC. In terms of the complexity, the business world, every business is becoming more interconnected and more complex. If you look at this sort of collection of images from the top right, you know, our business process is now worldwide in most organizations. So you can have a supplier in Australia with a purchase requisition created in South America, with goods delivered to Houston, Texas, and invoicing and payment and settlement done in a shared service center in Budapest. And no single person sees the end-to-end cycle of execution through. Now, that's all been enabled by integrated systems, which are great. But we used to rely a lot on line of sight, and we no longer have line of sight. So it's a critical thing to bear in mind. You know, that's one of the reasons we have the growing use of the global process owner model. Top left, you'd think with the new, with great systems and great processes, we would have much more effective use of resources, and you'd think that our exposure to fraud, error, and waste would be going down. All the evidence is it isn't. The ACFE continue to register that at about 5% of revenues for organizations around the world. I saw a recent survey that had it up to 6.5%. Now, 6.5% of revenue or the cost base is a very, very large amount of money, and we need to work out how to improve that as well. Bottom left, you see some of the sources of pain, and of course, we still have the issue of error. We need to make sure we have accuracy, and we're not losing out due to a human error. And finally, you would hope that with all of this great work we're doing, that assurance would become cheaper. Well, as we all know, it isn't. The audit fees aren't going down significantly, and in fact, in many cases, they're going up. So this is a complex world we're in. Now, you look also at the business world, particularly for world-class finance, in shared services is now the dominant operating model, but we have to be, there is a focus now not just about making shared service operations efficient within, but effective across the board and across the business. Hence, this idea of global process ownership I just referred to, end-to-end accountability, line of sight over purchase to pay, order to cash, record to report, and so on. Critical elements. This all affects GRC priorities and GRC programs. Robotics and artificial intelligence are on the march. We know this, we see this in our business applications, and we're seeing this in analytics and other things. The drive for analytics, we've talked for many years, if not decades, about the need for analytics and the critical requirement of analytics in business process, and particularly in finance. I heard a great comment about this is now the Nike moment, which is just do it. And then we've got these technology shifts, the postmodern ERP, no longer just the large centrist communist ERP, but a collection of applications based on a cloud-based center and surround applications supporting the end-to-end processes. And we're seeing that in all of the major technology platforms. So these are also affecting our priorities. So that gives us quite something to think about. Added to which, when we started out down the GRC route, when the term was first coined, the focus was very much on compliance, making sure that organizations could confirm and assure that controls that were implemented were effective and working. So we had the idea of implementing controls with a manual, hybrid, automated, monitoring them, attesting, managing them. But of course, that did give rise to a bit of a checkbox mentality. And there's a growing acceptance now that we need to take a more holistic enterprise risk focus. So controls are purely a way of managing risk. Policies are ways of managing risk, such as segregation of duties, for example, might be a policy, and they might be implemented as a control within in an ERP system. But the high-level risk, what is it? So we're seeing very much this now as a cycle, and we return this fact to act, because this, again, as we talked before about processes, with risk, we need to be basing more of our activities on fact rather than just judgment and opinion. So this idea of risk, policy, control, monitoring controls, remediate, take action, and that itself will revise our view of risk. So a much more integrated approach, which again helps us think better ways about how we approach our GRC thinking. A key question for all of us, whether you are 15 years into a GRC program or you're just starting out, is how do I know I'm on the right track? And there are 9 key themes or key questions that management and program owners need to ask and need to assess and define both where you are today and where you want to be. And this is absolutely essential. So everything from mission and objectives, what's the outcome we're looking for? What's the outcome we aim for? Stakeholder management, how do I ensure I have the right stakeholders for the program? What do I do when stakeholders change? How do I measure and communicate progress both internally and to stakeholders so we know we're on the right route to achieving our outcomes? Program organization, program governance, process design. A lot of organizations forget this. You're in governance, risk and compliance. At the very least, you're refining existing processes. In most organizations, you're defining new processes. That's a whole new ball game. Got to be able to understand that and decide how those processes are designed, where they're placed, where they're sourced, where they're operated, where they're headquarters, are they shared services, are they hub and spoke? And then, of course, there's automation and enabling technology, which gets a lot of attention, but it's one of 9 things. Skills and capability. Do I have the skills and wherewithal to make this work for the organization? And very importantly, this concept of business service management, which really has come out of the shared services world, but it's the idea that once I have this process operating, I have a business as usual process, how do I know the business is getting the service they need? How do I know that we are operating at an effective level? And how do I know if the business needs more or less of what we're doing? So these 9 levels, we need to be able to assess where we are today, even if we haven't even started on the GRC program, and then make judgments about what our priorities are, where we want to be, and that will help guide the right track. Because success is no accident, and all of the experience that we have from working with organizations and observing organizations around the world, those that are successful have integrated holistic GRC programs, basically operate to this kind of model. So that's by way of introduction. I would like now to introduce Hans van Ness. As I mentioned before, Chief Operating Officer of Consider Solutions, a vast panoply of experience, and Hans is going to share some experiences and case studies now. Hans.
Thank you, Dan. So essentially, we should ask ourselves, what are the neighbors doing around GRC? And as many neighbors, as many experiences. So I thought by myself, which experience and which case studies should I share? And I thought about the common elements for successful GRC implementations, and I came up with the word relevance. And I will explain that in 3 types of relevance that we observed. The first relevance of a good GRC implementation is showing business value, clear business value. And I will give you a few examples of that. And we plot those examples on the triangle of the 3 elements that we are addressing, so risk assurance, financial control and compliance, and finance process optimization. Every customer started from a certain point within this triangle and is covering 2 or 3 of those elements, or sometimes 1 of those elements. So the first example is a large car manufacturer that has implemented probably one of the biggest, or not even the biggest, GRC implementation in the world. And what they wanted to achieve is a no-hassle audit compliance. So the business value of this whole GRC program is to make sure that they don't get complaints from their external auditors on their access control in their vast landscape, with people having access to multiple ERPs from multiple locations all over the world. So audit compliance as the value. The second example is a leader in the fast-moving consumer goods area. Again, very international, very large, and they have looked for the best way to address waste, error, and fraud with the clear business value, cashback. In this case, they are looking, for instance, at the travel and expense throughout the world of their employees, of their over 80,000 employees. And everybody knows that it is monitored. They still every month find 50+ violations in this area, which brings money back to the organization. So clearly a limiting of fraud, error, and waste value. The next example is a company that manufactures hearing aids. They are sizable, again, very international. In most countries in the world they are present. And they were looking for a lean and mean operation around access control, emergency access. And they delivered a lot of value by implementing a self-service environment for user access, so that they didn't need highly paid specialized resources that were busy with other things already. And at the same time, they delivered a 24/7 support for their business. So a combination of saving money and higher services level as business value. And the fourth example, a world-leading toy manufacturer, they were very much triggered by detecting potential fraud in their organizations. They are operating in many countries, including many employees, but also other parties that they deal with. And they were just looking and tracing within their transactions for potential fraud elements. And the value that they got out of it is that they discovered high amounts of exceptions per year that they have checked out, and in many cases they could recuperate the money. So fraud detection as the value. So you see very different relevance elements. If I further look at successful organizations, the maturity level comes into place. What we see here is an example of an end-to-end process mapping tool we are using to look at the end-to-end process at a given organization to see who is doing what, who is responsible for what, how is the technology employed, which processes are in place, is there any oversight, and what potential risks are there. And we come up with a sort of traffic light system where we map the situation. And in the successful organizations, not everything is green. There are yellows and incidental reds, but successful organizations are aware of that, they address it, and in the next iteration they make sure that the traffic lights are more green. The third element of relevance that I found in successful organizations are the organizations that thought out loudly about finding a balance between do-it-yourself, or more saying, making GRC implementations part of your normal day-to-day business, versus getting help in areas for specific support to make your application better and work to the requirements of your stakeholders. That can be business support, that can be technology support, it can be risk analysis support. So deliver the support and get the support from outside your organization that helps you to get your traffic lights more green. There are some tendencies in there. The tendency is clearly to automate processes where possible and to outsource processes where it makes sense, where it is relevant. So in the analogy with the shared service centers. So 3 elements of relevancy that depict successful GRC implementations. So what is GRC? What's in the name? And what is IGRC? We want to address both generic observations that we have seen in the world, and we want to drill down to organizations that are doing that with the Infor technology. Interestingly enough, most observations that we do are quite generic. Generic in the sense they are in play and they are relevant in situations, whatever serious GRC tool that you're using. So I start with some generic observations and then I will drill down. There are 3 main key challenges for GRC initiatives that we have observed. First and foremost, the ownership question, or the deterioration of the ownership. It is not just another IT system, and in many organizations, GRC implementation has become an IT system, and there is a bit of lost history what the stakeholders were, what the stakeholders will be in the future, and what they require. And in many organizations, when there is something wrong, and people point out to there's something wrong with the tool, it's not something wrong with the tool, but especially the ownership part of the process is wrong, and there are mixed expectations or perceptions what the tool should do and what it should support. And a lot of that is coming from the discussion on scope and purpose. As Dan indicated, a lot of organizations started with segregation of duty driven by SOX compliance reasons 10, 15 years ago. And they implemented that. They had a huge sigh of relief that the auditors accepted what was implemented, and it was sort of forgotten. And it was never updated by asking the questions, does it still deliver enough value to the business, or are there smarter ways to do it? And of course, as a result of that, the total cost of ownership discussion comes up. Expensive tools, expensive people to support it, Can't we do it cheaper? Can't we do it less, etc.? Those discussions unfortunately don't happen in a structured way, again, most of the time, because you don't have good stakeholder alignment. Well, how do you address those key challenges? In fact, quite simple. Turn the challenges around. So reset your ownership. Make sure that you know who your stakeholders are. We are sometimes surprised if we do an end-to-end mapping with an organization that even people in the heart of the process don't know the whole end-to-end process and don't know all their stakeholders. Make sure that you agree on an optimized scope and purpose, an optimized mix of what you need to do and what you want to do and what you can afford to do, I should add. And that also links to the fact that you have to publish what you do for the business, make them aware of it, so that at least you have a check mark to see if you're on the right track. And with that, last but not least, optimize your total cost of ownership. Make sure that you use the technology that is the latest and the most efficient. Rethink the implementation model, who does what, and make sure that you optimize it from all angles. Tooling around GRC, well, we try to make an inventory of tools in this space, and we can of course discuss the definition of GRC and how far it goes. Somebody said to me that there are around 6,000 tools in the GRC, the wider GRC arena. Well, not all of them are really best in class and serve multiple purposes. But even the most advanced tools or tool suites don't cover all the needs in the GRC landscape. In the fact to act disk that Dan showed us, we need tools that help us to do risk management, to do policy management, to do controls management, to do the monitoring, and to support the remediation activities. And sometimes that can be done full circle for a simple slice. So for instance, if you want to just do access control risk, but most of the times it is a more complex risk definition requiring multiple policies, manual controls, automated controls, a whole set of things, and no single tool or tool suite can serve that all. So you have some choices there to go for the suite that has the best coverage for your needs, or you go for the best of breed. You go for one vendor and everything that is missing you build yourself, or you go for a best-in-class over multi-vendors. And of course, nowadays you have a choice to go on-premise or in the cloud, or a hybrid solution for those tools. And weirdly enough, if you analyze some of the issues that organizations have with their implementations, your current tool might still be the best option that you have. And by optimizing your process and your structures around it and your organization around it, you might discover that your investment was well placed, the investment that you made some years ago. Having the need for multiple tools means also interaction, and we call that IGRC, or integrated GRC. And what does integration mean? Integration is not a coding-driven thing, but it is an information relevance-driven thing. So if you want to look at a certain risk and you want to see if that risk is really happening in real life, you might be interested in the total number of exceptions or violations around that risk, but you're not interested in the details of that risk itself. So there's an aggregation element in there, but you may have to make sure that your risk management solution talks to your continuous monitoring solution, because they have a common taxonomy. And they should enable this end-to-end process, both from the detailed process like access control management, but also end-to-end from the act-to-fact cycle. So it is about resolving the individual problems, but also making sure that you have a means of finding systemic issues and improvements that are required on your risk and policy management areas. So far general GRC observations. Now diving a bit more into the detail of the Infor GRC solution, or Infor Risk and Compliance, IRC. And I will start first with a little State of the Union there. We looked at the audience for this webcast, and we have all-time approver, Infor Risk and Compliance, and even BizRite users on this session, but also people that just started and are not aware of this old naming information. And we have organizations that just contemplate to go using Infor Risk and Compliance and have no history. So I will try to serve everybody a bit here. You see here the timeline with the naming of the product and then the versions. We as Consider Solutions have been with that journey from almost the beginning, and so we still are happy to talk to some customers if they refer to BizRite, or other customers that refer to approver in the name that they like. Officially, it's Infor Risk and Compliance now. Just a brief summary on the IRC vision, and this is a very nice picture to explain that. We talk a lot about the stakeholders and the stakeholders' requirements, and their GRC requirements. They are on the top of this picture. The GRC requirements are hidden and are fed by the information, the transactions and the data in the monitored applications, because there the process, automated process is happening, so there the information is stored and there are the transactions are happening. And you see a whole list of applications that you can have, and I should say sometimes infrastructures and more than applications that you want to connect and make sure that they deliver you the information to look upon the controls that they embed, and look upon them from 4 different levels. First of all, the can-do level, so the access to the application, what can you do as a user, and are your applications configured in such a way that the controls that you embed in them act as expected. So that's the can-do aspect. And then after that, you also have a did-do aspect, whereby you look at what did the people do with the granted access they have? What did they do with the transactions? And did they use the transactions in such a way that it is the normal practice as an outcome that you see? And more specific also, did they use master data elements in there in the way you designed your master data to be? On top of this, you have multiple control views depicted in the red rectangles, which combine the requirements from the stakeholders and the data in the ERP and in the infrastructure, and give you the analysis and the reports on what is happening there. And Infor Risk and Compliance does that in a 360-degree way, whereby you identify any violations and any risks, you investigate them in detail, you look for root causes, you set out actions, and you report the results in whatever aggregated form or individual form back to the relevant parties. So it's a full circle. And to do that, IRC offers various components, again following the analogy of the can-do and the did-do, both on the application security and user access, on the system configuration, on the transaction and master data monitoring, and also a very important element on the certification and attestation of the things you do in this world. It's a very much a live product with a roadmap that is looking at delivering on average 2 releases per year, both addressing functionality, connectivity, and technology in equal portions. From a functionality point of view, you can, for instance, think about the option to have an equivalent on-premise or cloud version, depending on what the the choice is that your organization desires. You can, from a connectivity point of view, you can think about following the evolution of the ERPs, sometimes the revolution of the ERPs that is happening out there, and you see some names mentioned there, and also supporting more and more the cloud-based ERPs that are becoming part of your hybrid infrastructure. And also in the technology stack to make sure that you follow the changes that happen out there in the landscape, might it be a browser or a new database. We are currently on Infor Risk and Compliance version 10, and this is a large portion of the approver and BizRight users. Over 60% already have upgraded and are in production with IRC 10. And 25% are undergoing or planning this upgrade very soon. And amongst this, some of the very large and maybe largest GRC implementations in the world. And some nice quotes from customers and users. Depending on where they're coming from and what their need was, it's very different. And of course, an end user will say something different than a more technology-focused user. If you now observe the more successful GRC, and that in fact also the Infor Risk and Compliance users, the more successful ones have embedded their implementation in their daily business. Clear end-to-end approach, yeah, making this not a project but a continuous improvement project. They have really balanced, cracked this ownership question: who owns what, who does what, yeah, and what are the responsibilities? And they are actually measuring the value of applying their GRC and make sure that they set themselves KPIs in this business service model that they're addressed to make sure that they improve even further in the future. So on the other end of the mirror, you see the more frustrated GRC users. Clearly, all they have process ownership issues, and they haven't changed their implementation to meet the new context and requirements of the business. Often implemented as a pure IT thing across elements. And a lot of those frustrated GRC users will have at a certain point in time the discussion, should we need a new tool? But we think that changing the tool in most cases doesn't help you. Changing the process is a far quicker and better way to go. We also looked at what are the quick wins that these successful organizations applied that gave them the bigger business value. And you see them here, and I will pick out one or two. I think less is more is a very important one, especially from the SOX compliancy days. The bigger the report, yeah, the more massive the report, the better it was. Now we are looking more upon it from a risk management perspective, and successful organizations have found that doing less, so reporting less on violations and exceptions, but reporting on the most important ones for the organization, yeah, both in volume and in value, is a far more effective way to make sure that what you deliver to the business is seen and is acted upon. Also, there are specifically for Infor Risk and Compliance some quick wins to be made by improving your implementation. A health check is sometimes long overdue. A health check on both the process, and we printed it out bold here to make it clear that the process is so important. Automate the process. A lot of stuff can be automated, and not all organizations are aware of that fact. It could be a quick win to lower cost and release resources for that. And you can go a step further. You can go further streamline the process, the end-to-end process. For instance, the access provisioning. You can give this 24/7 end-user support, as we described in one of the cases. You can widen the footprint of your monitoring by looking at the entire landscape. For instance, the example in procure to pay, you see more and more that there is a cloud-based front end, as I would call it, or even a vendor marketplace that you integrate with your backend ERP. So it is all nice to control the backend ERP, but if you don't control the access to the front end portal, you're opening the back door of your security model, and you should pay attention to that. So then, this was a quick overview.
Well, thank you, Hans, for an insightful tour through GRC technology in general and through Infor risk and compliance. Voice of experience there. We have got a number of questions coming in, so please keep asking your questions. If you have some, now's the time to ask them, because we'll be dealing with those in a few minutes. So, coming to some conclusions on this, how do I define best practice for me? So we know what common practice is, but how do I work out what's best practice? And we need to find a way of mapping what we're doing at the moment versus what we aspire to. And I talked earlier about this success model. Very, very important. If there's one thing you take from this webcast, I do encourage you to take this from it. These 9 themes: assess where you are today, where you want to be, take action, and it will make life a lot easier. There's the governance piece, and on the right-hand side, this whole integrated risk thinking is definitely a way of bringing the organization together around common goals and common outcomes. So what should I do? Lots of ideas here, lots of case studies, experiences of technology in general and of the IRC approver technology specifically. So some important considerations about where you go next, and the deeper dive does depend on your diving board. So your level of GRC maturity, are you mature as an organization or are you just starting out? Do you have, are you using IRC today or approver, and are you using it, do you have an IRC enabled process, or do you really have a tool that you're deploying? And the same is true with other GRC tools. Do you have a GRC enabled process, or you're just a GRC tool user? That is also related to maturity. Or do you have no systemic approach at all? Depending where you are, these considerations will have a different resonance. But I would say the number one consideration is that to get your stakeholders together, the ones you believe you have today and potentially the ones you should have, and take that success framework, that nine theme pentagon, define your benchmark and build a roadmap and get stakeholder alignment and agreed priorities. Business process exception analytics. There's a lot of talk. We've heard various conversations about segregation of duties and sensitive access. These are important controls, and so are the embedded controls in ERPs, and so are the other controls we need to attest and certify. But we also need to look at the tire tracks. So do consider either a risk-based or performance-based, or both, process analysis, process exception analysis, either as an assessment or as an execution of systemic process. If you're doing it already, think about extending the process landscape to e-procurement, EHR. Again, Hans talked about the e-procurement element of the procure to pay or source to pay world. If you're an existing IRC user, make sure that you're on the latest technology. You've got optimized capabilities, optimized execution, and speed of operation. From a user access management point of view, segregation of duties and sensitive access. Many of you have cracked this in terms of the control, monitoring, and remediation. Some of you are starting out on it. So whether you need help on an assessment of your current status, or you need to automate it and embed it, or optimize perhaps by doing a rule and policy review against your latest organization, business processes, and ERP, as we're doing for a number of organizations, that's another avenue to wander down. User access provisioning, looking at optimizing it and ultimately moving to self-service. This is a quick win. Hans referred to it, shared a case study earlier. It's a quick win. It can save quite a substantial amount of money on effort, which is really not high value effort, and that effort can redeploy to much more important things. And then the fifth level, if you're reasonably mature, then this idea of end-to-end integration from enterprise risk through controls monitoring, process monitoring, and action. having a common process. These are 5 different areas that you might want to consider and take forward. In terms of conclusions, I think it's clear that the exploitation of GRC tools and IRC specifically is maturing. Terminology is clear. I think everyone now is more able to communicate and understand what they're trying to achieve. Best practices are there, and there is clearly a shift which is underway to risk and performance-based thinking, not just compliance-based thinking. From fact to act, it's a risk management approach, risk assurance, process optimization. GRC has matured from tool-oriented to process-centric. There's no doubt at all. I think it's true if you think about any other technology. In ERPs, everyone worried about the ERP, and then they realized they had to worry about the process. GRC, people worried about the tools, now they realize they have to worry about the process. No one size fits all. There's no tool that's going to create a nirvana, sadly, but there is an important element to address not just core ERPs, but focus on that end-to-end process coverage. And in terms of Infor risk and compliance, it is a leader in continuous controls monitoring, both on the can-do and did-do, so it's user access and controls monitoring and attestation, and transaction and data monitoring. It is enabling some of the largest GRC implementations in the world, which are pretty impressive to see. From our perspective, we have had a ticket. We bought a pass early on in this journey, and we've been down the twists and turns, developed some significant best practices and insights, driving some innovation and collaboration with Infor, and I think the rest is pretty self-evident. We are running to a close. We've got some questions here. This is what we've discussed. We've been through that agenda. I do want to now get to your questions. So you've still got a few minutes to ask a few more. Right, I'm going to pick a few here. We've got some interesting questions here that come from some of the ERP folks. Some organizations are interested in some questions around SAP and Oracle. But I'll start with this one. Just starting out with GRC, is it better to start with SOD or process transaction monitoring? So Hans, would you like to take a stab at that?
Yeah, that's a good question. It completely depends on your perceived areas of risk and your vision. So you might have some high visible business risks now that you want to address first, but you shouldn't forget that upfront prevention also can help dramatically to make sure that those risks not are happening again. So in this case, I would just suggest take the success framework. So take the Pentagon again and take that first step and check with your stakeholders in a workshop to agree on what they think are the mission, the objectives, and the desired outcomes, so that you can set a balance on preventive and detective elements in your solution, and based on that decide where to start, or maybe do things in parallel.
Right. Thanks, Hans. So if you want to understand more there, then by all means contact us. Contact Emma on this. If that helps, if it doesn't help, ask Emma and we can point you to the right expert. One more quick one. We are using Sun Systems as our ERP. Do we need to use ION middleware to implement IRC?
Quick answer. I can give a quick answer. Yes. Yeah, surely you can use ION. ION is a very interesting piece of middleware delivered by Infor that does much more than just connecting stuff, and you can use that to connect Sun Systems to Infor risk and compliance. But you can also do it directly. It is completely depending on your vision, your organization around middleware, and if you want to use ION in a wider sense. So it is a sincere option, but you have to look at your specific situation to make the right choice there. Okay,
thanks, Hans. I think we're running 2 minutes over, but one final question, which before we we'll have to do the rest by email. We're implementing S4HANA, which is the SAP new generation ERP. What changes do we need to make to our IRC implementation technically and control-wise?
Okay.
That's probably not a quick question, is it? But anyway.
Well, S4HANA is a long question. We have run a separate webinar on that, so if people are interested, they can go to our website on it. Quick answer, yes, you can get an S4HANA adapter for Infor risk and compliance, but you will have to review your policy and rules because S4HANA is quite differently in its internals from the current SAP implementations. So you have to regard it in that sense as hooking up another ERP to your IRC.
Right.
So a bit of work, but the technology enables it.
Okay, that sounds like a bigger discussion, so I suggest you, if you want to contact Hans directly or through Emma here, we'll engage in that conversation more. So if you have any other questions, please email them to Emma on the email address there, etaylor@consider.biz. We have the other questions to respond to by email. I'd like to thank you all for your attention and your time. Appreciate it. And do let us know if there's other topics you want us to cover in future webcasts. We've got a pretty broad array. We have run 3 or 4 minutes over, so I apologize for that. But thank you very much for your time. Have a great day, and look forward to speaking to you again. Thank you.